This is what I would like to do when cloning objects, and it's not possible. PHP 8.3 is coming on November 23 this year. And with it, you can override read-only properties while cloning objects. But there's a side note. So, read-only properties. There's a common pattern where you create classes and clone them to make changes. And these kinds of objects are called immutable objects, and they help to prevent a range of subtle bugs. And from a developer's point of view, something like this would be pretty cool, where you can clone an object and override its data for the new object. Now, unfortunately, this is not possible, and also not what this new feature of overwriting read-only properties while cloning in PHP 8.3 is about. Instead, it is about being able to override read-only properties within the magic clone method. It's still useful, but not for managing immutable objects. The thing with the magic clone method is that you cannot pass any data to it from the outside. That means its possibilities from the outside are rather limited, but it is useful to manage nested objects from within. Now imagine you have a read-only object with a reference to another object. And thanks to this RFC, you can clone the parent and make a clone of the child as well, which wasn't possible before. So essentially cloning the whole object, including objects nested within. Now this pattern is called deep cloning, and it's a pretty common thing to do. So its addition is pretty useful for PHP, but it's simply not that thing I and many others were hoping for. Now don't worry, internals do plan on adding some kind of clone with syntax in the future, but they haven't decided yet how it will look, and it will definitely not be in PHP 8.3. But there are other things. For example, you can now make read-only anonymous classes and type class constants. You can also access class constants via a dynamic syntax now, which is a bit more convenient. There's a new JSON validate function, which will check whether a string is valid JSON or not without having to decode the whole string. It's more performant than JSON decode, so it might be useful in places where you don't need to access the parsed JSON data and simply need to know whether a JSON string is valid or not. There are also some additions to PHP's Randomizer. There's the getBytesFromString method, which will return a random string based on the characters you've given it, as well as the getFloat and nextFloat methods, which will return random floats. Next is an important change. It's a breaking one, actually. When you take an empty array and you add an item to it with a negative index, -5, for example, then you add another item, you would expect the index of that item to be -4, right? Well, yes, in PHP 8.3 it is, but in previous versions, the second item would get index 0. Now, I can come up with many places in my code where I rely on negative indices, so I'm not sure how many projects will be impacted by this bug fix, but it might break code in some places. So, something to look out for. Next is a new attribute, the override attribute. Adding it to a method signifies that you know this method is overriding a parent method. It shows intent. Now imagine at one point you change the parent's method. If you then forget to change the child's implementation, PHP will throw an error telling you, hey, this method isn't overriding anything, even though you told me it should. You might want to check that out. Override can be a useful feature to prevent pushing bugs to production. Although I feel that with modern PHP, with refactoring tools like Rector and PHP Storm and static analyzers like PHP Stan, I don't think we need these kinds of checks to happen at runtime anymore. But that's a story for another video. For now, in PHP 8.3, the attribute is here and you might as well use it. Next is Stack Overflow detection, and not that kind of Stack Overflow, but the real kind of Stack Overflow. This is a pretty neat feature that will be able to detect a bunch of scenarios where PHP would normally crash with a segfault, which are difficult to debug. But now instead, PHP will give you a normal error with a stack trace. That's much easier to debug. Now, there are a bunch of small changes in this release as well. It's too much to go through all of them in this video, so I left a link in the description to a blog post that lists everything you need to know. And while you're down there, maybe also leave a like and share in the comments what your favorite feature is in PHP 8.3. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.